What is going on, everybody? My name is Tyler. Hope you're enjoying this weekend. I'm recording this on Sunday, March 28th, to get that sort of feel. I know I am not doing 100% great because Syracuse lost in the Sweet 16 on Saturday night after I turned 21. Yes, I turned 21 on Friday. You could save the birthday messages for the comments down below. I'm just kidding, of course. But I'm not going to be talking about college basketball. Not today. That'll be for another day after the Elite Eight, probably. I'll be previewing the Final Four. I want to do that. Today I'll be talking about the NBA trade deadline. That came and went on Thursday afternoon, March 25th. There were a lot of moves made, a lot of moves that didn't get made. So I'll be talking about all of those, my thoughts and opinions on each of the major moves. None of these minor moves like the DeLon Wright trade. Still happened. I'm not going to talk about it just because it's not a major move, in my opinion. I'll also talk about some of the buyout guys. Obviously, there have been two big names that have been bought out by their respective teams and have since signed with the contenders for the NBA title. So I'll talk about those later in the video. But let's start off with the Orlando Magic because they made a series of moves to really signify the direction of this team. Let's start off with the fact that Orlando currently sits second to last in the Eastern Conference at 15-30, 16 and a half games out of first place. And then for the 10 seed, because that's what you need to get into the play-in tournament, they're 4.5 games out. So there's still a chance, let's be real here, but with the remaining 28 or so games of the season, they've played 45. I don't know how many they've canceled. They got about 28 or so left, just given COVID and everything, because they're playing to 72. So if you want to do the math exactly, it's 27, but I don't know exactly how many there are because of COVID and how they're rescheduling games. Well, Orlando made a series of moves that signify that they are not so much looking to win now. They're going to try to rebuild around that young core of Jonathan Isaac and I guess maybe Mo Bamba, although he hasn't played, and Markelle Fultz. Fultz and Isaac, who have been out with injury this season, been major losses for this Magic team. And the first move happened relatively early on Thursday, and it was the most surprising of them all, I feel like. It was Orlando trading Nikola Vucevic, their all-star center, along with Al-Farouq Aminu to the Chicago Bulls for Otto Porter Jr., Wendell Carter Jr., and 2 future first-round draft picks. And I'm going to close this window I have in front of me. Sorry about that. It's very windy here in Syracuse this afternoon, this Sunday evening, I guess. The Orlando trading with their all-star center and Vucevic, the guy who was just named an all-star, I mean, that definitely was a big red flag. Be like, okay, this is a rebuild. They're not doing anything else. There's no ifs or buts around it. Makes no sense. For Chicago, we'll start with them first. I like this move. Chicago currently sits in the 10 seed in the Eastern Conference at 19-25. They're a game and a half up on the Raptors to hold that 10 seed and be in the play-in tournament. 2 games back of 8th behind the Miami Heat. They're 4 games back of 4th behind the New York Knicks. So that just shows you how tight the Eastern Conference is between being in the playoffs and being out of the play-in tournament entirely. You pair Vucevic with Zach LaVine, someone who assumes to be the centerpiece of your franchise. Zach LaVine will be, especially now that they've gotten rid of Wendell Carter. Kobe White is not really panning out necessarily. It looks like Zach LaVine is going to get paid big time by the Bulls in the coming years. I don't know if it's this year or next year his contract expires, but he will get paid, and he will have a co-star, although a little bit older in Vucevic. He's still someone you can rely on. You got 2 guys who are all-star players. That plain simple. Then you got a nice surrounding core. Lowry Markkanen. You got Thad Young. Patrick Williams, the rookie, the 4th overall pick in this past year's draft. You do lose 2 first-round picks, which always hurts, especially if things don't work out for Chicago. But this is a signifying move that they are trying to compete now. They're done with all this sucking. Because remember, the Chicago Bulls are a team of history. Great history. 6 championships with Michael Jordan. They had all the success with Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah and Luol Deng in the early Jimmy Butler years, but always kept running into LeBron James's teams. So they never got over that hump. They're probably not going to get over the hump anytime soon, but they're trying to build the core. Maybe you get a 3rd star to come in there into Chicago to play alongside Vucevic and LaVine. You never know. For Orlando, Otto Porter Jr., he does not live up to the hype. He was, I believe, the 3rd overall pick in 2012 behind Anthony Davis and Bradley Beal. No, was it 2012? 2013. He was the 3rd overall pick. I don't remember which draft it was. These years all get boggled up in my head. Out of Georgetown. He really has not lived up to hype. He's been a serviceable wingman, but he's probably not going to live long on this Orlando team Maybe he'll just be a nice veteran presence. But I don't know how he fits well with Terrence Ross because they're kind of similar guys, 3 and D. And then you got Wendell Carter, who has not necessarily panned out in Chicago, partially due to injury, so things out of his control. But Orlando could have drafted Wendell Carter. It said they took Mo Bamba 1 pick earlier in that 2018 draft. So it'll be interesting to see. You got these 2 young guys in Wendell Carter and Mo Bamba who really have not lived up to the hype necessarily in their first few years in the league. Carter for injuries, Bamba because Orlando sucks in terms of managing their young guys, I guess. Excuse me. So the 2 first-round draft picks, that's really what's going to be the meat of this. Orlando has their draft picks. They're going to try to acquire as much talent as possible in these coming drafts. The 2021 draft is supposed to be loaded, so I wouldn't be surprised if they try to get the number 1 overall pick, whether it be to get Cade Cunningham or Evan Mobley or Jonathan Kuminga or whoever it is, and really start building around that young core. But that wasn't it for Orlando. They got rid of Evan Fournier as well, their longtime shooting guard, and he seems to be someone who every year seemed to be on the market. They only got 2 second-round picks, which is interesting, I guess. They also got a massive trade exception, I think. I believe so. I'm not 100% sure how that necessarily is. But for Boston, this is a great move. Boston needed it big time. They have been sputtering. They are currently 7th in the Eastern Conference, 23 and 23, 9 games out of first. Obviously, a game back out of fourth, so they're not totally out of it. But things just have not been going Boston's way so far this season. Outside of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, Kemba Walker, the injury really hurt him. He's been not 100% this season. Marcus Smart getting hurt definitely did not help. Evan Fournier is a bucket. So whenever Tatum and Brown are on the bench, you bring Fournier on. He's someone who can at least keep the offense somewhat afloat. And I like that move for Boston, especially getting into the second part of the season. And the final trade Orlando made was shipping Aaron Gordon and Gary Clark to Denver in exchange for rookie guard R.J. Hampton, Gary Harris, and a 2025 protected first-round pick. Aaron Gordon wanted out, he said, and I think this is a good move for Denver in the sense that, and I know a lot of other media members have said, so I'm not reinventing the wheel here, but it fits perfectly. When Denver lost Jeremy Grant, we've seen what he's done in Detroit so far this season. They are hoping that Aaron Gordon can be that type of guy. A guy that could benefit off of Nikola Jokic and really just dominate inside the paint and stretch the floor a little bit as well. Because Aaron Gordon's been shooting relatively well from three-point this season. I believe he's shooting around 40%, if I'm not mistaken. I could be totally wrong. But someone's just a little scrappy who will do it all type thing. And it pairs nicely along with Jokic because he doesn't need the ball all the time. He can let Jokic do his facilitating, let Jamal Murray run the offense a little bit. What's interesting about this for Denver, and I know other people said this as well once again, but they already have Jokic and Murray on max contracts. Michael Porter Jr. is going to get a max contract. I don't think Denver makes this move without expecting to give Aaron Gordon an extension, and he's due for one soon. So to have 4 guys on max deals, Denver's going to have to do some finagling of the cap, and really, they might have to deplete their core a little bit. Maybe get rid of a Paul Millsap. They've already gotten rid of Gary Harris, obviously. Maybe get rid of a Will Barton, whoever it may be. We'll see how Denver plays that out. And then on the Orlando side, R.J. Hampton is a young guy, hasn't really gotten much playing time, but once again, another player to bring into that roster, a younger player. With Fultz's injury history, Hampton could be someone who can replace Fultz if need be. 2025 first-round pick. Obviously, we don't know what the draft's going to look like in 2025, especially if the one-and-done rule changes and all that. But it's nice to have a first-round pick always, especially if Denver starts to get a little worse. I think the bet for Orlando is Denver's still not going to be as good in 2025 as they are in 2021. And then Gary Harris, another player who hasn't necessarily lived up to the hype, but he's a solid veteran guy that you could pair with these young guys that are on similar timelines. Another move made by Denver, which has gotten talked about, but not as much as I think it should be. Denver acquired JaVale McGee from Cleveland for Isaiah Hartenstein, who is a 2020 and a 2023 second-round pick, protected second-round pick, and an unprotected second-round pick in 2027. So a lot for JaVale McGee, but this is huge. Denver lost Mason Plumlee in the offseason as well, ironically, to Detroit. And now they have a backup center with veteran experience, playoff experience in JaVale McGee to play behind Nikola Jokic. JaVale McGee played on the Warriors teams that won multiple titles. He played on the Lakers last season that ended up winning a title. So JaVale McGee just being in that locker room, having that presence, really helps Denver from that standpoint of getting over the hump because they are ready to take that leap. Denver currently sits at, they're 5th in the West. Game and a half behind the Lakers, who are currently sputtering without LeBron James and Anthony Davis, who we'll talk more about later. So Denver has an opportunity because they're tied for 6th with Portland. They're 3 games up on San Antonio for 7th. Denver has an opportunity here to get back into the top 4, get home court advantage at least for the first round, and really set themselves up nicely for the playoffs in terms of seeding, and hopefully try to get things going. Because also, when Jokic is not on the court, you bring in McGee. McGee's probably not going to play more than 20 minutes a game. Let's be real. And maybe not even on the court at the same time as Jokic, just depending on the matchup. McGee will just be someone who comes in there, and he's not a liability on the floor. And I feel like that is desperately what Denver could use to back up Nikola Jokic. So, enough about Orlando, enough about Denver. There were some other moves made. Maybe one of my favorite moves made of the entire day goes to the LA Clippers, which pains me to say as a Lakers fan. But they acquired Rajon Rondo from Atlanta in exchange for Lou Williams and 2 future second-round picks. First of all, the fact that they had that the Clippers had to give up 2 future second-round picks is very interesting. But I guess that's what the price that you pay for Rondo. But the Clippers need it. They do need it. They've been sputtering at guard. They're currently 3rd in the West, a game back of Phoenix for 2nd, game and a half ahead of the Lakers for 4th in the conference. The Clippers just needed the point guard help. Rondo has the playoff experience, has the championship experience. Obviously, he did it with the Lakers last season. He's done it with the Celtics. Patrick Beverley, he's been in and out of the lineup, not great. But you bring Rondo off the bench. That is where he'll be key, because Reggie Jackson will probably be the starter for this team. Just bring him in. He'll play 25 to 30 minutes. He just got to be the shooter that he was with the Lakers, but he can just run the offense. Because Kawhi Leonard has also made it very clear. Now, he does not like necessarily being the guy to bring the ball up. He doesn't like doing that like LeBron does or like Giannis does in running the offense. He'd rather play more off the ball. So you bring in Rondo, someone who is very good and recognizing what's going on the floor and just making the right play. That can be huge for the Clippers, especially down the stretch in those playoff games. You have a lineup out there of Rondo, Kawhi, Paul George, Serge Ibaka. Maybe you throw in Zubac, depending on the lineup. Maybe you play Reggie Jackson or Marcus Morris. It all depends on the lineup. Maybe Nick Batum, who knows? It all depends on the opponent. But you have 4 solid guys in Ibaka, Leonard, George, Rondo down the stretch of games, especially in the playoffs. That could be really beneficial for this team. And then on the Atlanta side, I mean, I get all the jokes, Lou Williams and Magic City and all that, blah, blah, blah. And he did say that he questioned retiring, but I think this is good for Lou Williams. Lou Williams, I think, has gotten a little overrated, in my opinion, in recent years. And I think this will bring him back down to earth. Maybe he could help out Trae Young a little bit, do something what Rondo couldn't. I think this is the twilight of Lou Williams' career, and this was just a move because it wasn't really working out for Rondo in Atlanta. He was making way too much money and not giving them as much as they probably would have wanted, given the direction of the team. So they just tried to swap him, Lou Williams. I wouldn't be surprised if Lou Williams gets bought out. It's highly possible. Unlikely, but it's highly possible. But I love that move for the Clippers. That's why it's my favorite. Miami, big team in this trade deadline. First, they get Nemanja Bjelica from Sacramento, just a nice power forward. He is only playing 16.9 minutes per game this season, but he is just another body. And this allowed for Miami to make another move because you're replacing Bjelica for Kelly Olynyk. Kelly Olynyk was formerly in the role that Bjelica would play, but now Kelly Olynyk will be heading over to Houston along with Avery Bradley and a 2022 first-round swap rights in exchange for Victor Oladipo. So now you got a big 3 in Miami somewhat. Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Victor Oladipo. Victor Oladipo, when healthy, mind you, is an all-star level player. He's just been hurt the last few years. So the fact that they only had to give up, they didn't have to give up any of their big guys, any of their core guys, in Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Kendrick Nunn, Casey Okpala, and they didn't have to give up much for Victor Oladipo. This is great for Miami, and now they'll have to re-sign him in the offseason, but it works out nicely. So now Miami, they have a solid rotation. Their starting line, they also got Trevor Ariza in exchange for Myers Leonard, so that's another veteran presence. But I'm just looking at the roster right now. Bam Adebayo, Trevor Ariza, Bielitsa, Jimmy Butler, Goran Dragic, Tyler Hero, Andre Iguodala, Kendrick Nunn, Oladipo, Duncan Robinson, and maybe Precious Achiuwa. You can go 11 deep easily in the playoffs. And maybe Precious Achiuwa doesn't play as much in the postseason depending on the situation. Maybe KZ Okpala or Kendrick Nunn don't play as much in the playoffs. You can go confidently go 9 deep in the playoffs. And in an Eastern Conference with Brooklyn loading up, Milwaukee has a bunch of guys, Philly looking still strong. This is great for Miami. Now, granted, Miami did lose out on LaMarcus Aldridge, which was a huge loss for them. We'll talk about where LaMarcus Aldridge went in a moment. But I like what Miami's got going here. They are setting themselves up nicely for the playoffs, and they currently sit 8th in the East. They're tied with Indiana for the 9th spot in the Eastern Conference. So they are on the border of missing the playoffs and missing the play-in game because they're only 2 up on Chicago. But once again, they're 2 back of New York for the 4th seed. So Miami, they can go on a little run here. They can jump up big time. And looking at the Eastern Conference, by the way, Philly, Brooklyn, Milwaukee is 1, 2, 3. Brooklyn will probably supplant Philly as the number 1 seed when it's all said and done, but that's your top 3. Then you got New York, Charlotte, Atlanta at 4, 5, and 6. I don't think all 3 of those teams make the play-in or the playoffs as a whole. I think Charlotte drops out. They're missing LaMelo Ball, although they still got Gordon Hayward and Terry Rozier and all those guys, but LaMelo Ball was great for them. I think Charlotte drops out. Atlanta, they went on a massive win streak. They'll come back to earth and drop out. So you have, and I think New York can actually stay if they keep things going. Julius Randle's been playing really well all season long. But then you got Boston, Miami, Indiana, Chicago, Toronto. 6 teams vying for those spots. It's going to be interesting down the stretch to see who gets in and who gets out in the Eastern Conference. Moving on. We'll go to Philly next because we just mentioned them and we also mentioned New York. Let me find the deal. So Philadelphia and Oklahoma City made a deal. Philly got George Hill. That's basically the big guy. New York was involved too, but they've waived a bunch of guys. Austin Rivers is no longer at the Knicks. Terrence Ferguson was sent to New York, and he got waived. But the big deal was Philly getting George Hill. George Hill is definitely past his prime. Don't get me wrong. But what they needed was a veteran point guard in the playoffs. Because obviously Ben Simmons is very good, but George Hill has been there, done that before. He's just another rotation piece that you could throw in there. So you got a roster now in Philly. Joel Embiid's hurt, but he's coming back. You still got Ben Simmons as your number 2 option behind Embiid. Tobias Harris has had a great season. Danny Green has had playoff experience. Seth Curry is a solid veteran. Furkan Korkmaz has emerged nicely. Shake Milton is a solid backup point guard. George Hill is a solid backup point guard. Dwight Howard, championship experience. Matisse Thybulle is a nice young player. Tyrese Maxey, maybe not getting as much playing time as you probably would like, but he still looked good. So Philly is now another one team similar to Miami where they are loading up players to go at Brooklyn, which will be huge when it comes set in time for the playoffs because most likely Miami will play Philly in the second round. Maybe not. Probably not if Miami is the 4 seed and Milwaukee stays a 3. You get my point. Eventually, Miami, Philly, and Milwaukee will have to play Brooklyn, and maybe one of the others. Milwaukee will have to play over Philly and Miami. You get what I'm saying. So you need to set yourself up nicely to play those teams. I think Philly's done that. I think Miami has done that. And now looking at Milwaukee, obviously their big splashy move came early on in the offseason when they traded away a bunch of draft picks and some other role players like Eric Bledsoe and whatnot in exchange for Drew Holiday. Sorry, I'm looking at other things. I'm trying to find the trade that they made. Here it is. PJ Tucker. So they traded away Drew Holiday. That was their big trade in the offseason. But then Houston, given the current situation they're in, they finalized the deal to send basically PJ Tucker a 2022 first-round pick to the Bucks in exchange for DJ Augustine and DJ Wilson and a 2023 unprotected first-round pick. So they swap first-round picks, but the main part of the deal is that the Bucks get P.J. Tucker. P.J. Tucker was not happy in Houston, and now you got just another physical body, someone that Giannis can kick out to in the corner. We know P.J. Tucker is one of the best corner three-point shooters in the NBA. Nice guy for Giannis to kick out to, and just a big body presence in the post when you're going up against, say, a Blake Griffin or LaMarcus Aldridge in Brooklyn, or you need someone to throw at Tobias Harris, or I guess Joel Embiid or Bam Adebayo, but those are probably not great matchups. You got someone in P.J. Tucker, and this just adds a little bit more depth. The Bucks, I think, desperate are of the three teams vying for second right now in the East behind Brooklyn, between Miami, Milwaukee, and Philly. The Bucks have the best player in Giannis, but I think the best overall team, the Bucks have the worst one. They have Giannis, they have Drew Holiday, they have Chris Middleton, a very solid big three. But I kind of like Miami's a lot more, and I'm not hating on Phillies. I like Phillies a little bit more as well. And then looking at the rest of the depth, Brook Lopez, solid player. Dante DiVincenzo is a decent guard. Obviously, you bring in P.J. Tucker. I like the move from Milwaukee. Don't get me wrong. I like the move, but it's just something about they needed to do something else, and I would like to see what they do in the buyout market. I don't know what their options are, but I would like to see what they do. And then I'm just going to talk Houston real quick. Because we talked a lot of moves that involve the Rockets. They traded away P.J. Tucker. They traded away Victor Oladipo. I mean, this has been a loss. This has been a horrible season. They've lost what? They at one point lost 20 in a row. I mean, they're 13-32. They traded away James Harden. They traded away all that. Basically what they got for James Harden. Because here's the thing. And I'm not the first person to say this, but I will admit it. For James Harden in that trade, instead of getting Victor Oladipo, they could have had Jarrett Allen and Karis LeVert from Brooklyn. They also could have made a deal for James Harden for Ben Simmons, but they opted not to for whatever reason. They ended up getting Victor Oladipo. Now they've traded away Victor Oladipo. So in totality, they've gotten 9 first-round picks, 4, I believe, unprotected, and 5 pick swaps. They have gotten Avery Bradley, Dante Exum, and Kelly Olynyk. That's basically all they got for James Harden, and they might still lose their first-round draft pick this year. If they're outside the top 5 thanks to the Russell Westbrook trade, they could lose their first-round pick, and they might have the worst record in the NBA, or third worst, given how it currently stands. It's just been a bad day for Houston. Continuing on, not many moves left to talk about. Toronto, they traded away Norman Powell, key piece for their roster. He's been that way for a few years. They traded him to Portland in exchange for Gary Harris and Rodney Hood. For Toronto, this gives them a little bit more guard depth. I don't know why they traded away Norman Powell necessarily. I thought he was a nice fit on their team. But I guess they got a few more guys to throw out. And Norman Powell for Portland's going to score a lot. They ain't going to defend anyone. But you pair Norman Powell with C.J. McCollum and Damian Lillard, I'm interested to see how this goes. They actually play, the Raptors do, play the Blazers. It's currently 41-32 at the end of the first quarter. They ain't defending anyone, but they're going to score a lot. Let's move on to the moves that did not happen. Lonzo Ball not being traded by New Orleans. I love that for New Orleans. I definitely felt like Lonzo Ball played well with Zion Williamson. Speaking about New Orleans, by the way, they did actually make one more move before I go too much in depth. They did trade away J.J. Redick. They sent him and Nicola Melli to Dallas in exchange for James Johnson, Wes Iwundu, and a 2021 second-round pick. That's just to get J.J. Redick off. Dallas needed him. I like that move for Dallas because it gives a shooter for Luka Doncic to dish it out to. Nice move there, especially since the Josh Richardson thing hasn't necessarily worked. New Orleans, they just need to get him off their books. I mean, it wasn't working out. But back to Lonzo Ball. I love the move that it was to keep him, pair him with Zion Williamson. And honestly, I will say, I feel like they should trade Brandon Ingram. I just don't think there's a place on this team for Brandon Ingram alongside Zion. Because Zion is now turned into this point forward monster. Brandon Ingram does add a nice element to pair with Zion. You got 2 young stars and then the third nice, really solid player. But I am not necessarily sure if Brandon Ingram's the future. Lonzo Ball, the big rumor was him going Chicago in exchange for Lauri Markkanen. Thank God New Orleans didn't make that deal because I don't know how that would have worked. You pair Zion with Lauri Markkanen and Steven Adams. Yikes. But I'm excited to see now what New Orleans does with Lonzo in terms of restricted free agency this summer. Then you have Toronto, once again, not trading Kyle Lowry. And ultimately, I feel like what it came down to was the $30 million salary. Kyle Lowry is making a lot of money this year. He's going to be a free agent. So I feel like a lot of teams were, and this has been said, concerned about making him a rental. I feel like Philly, they would have to give up their entire core outside of Embiid, Harris, and Simmons to get Kyle Lowry. I don't think they would have done that. Miami wouldn't have done that. The Lakers wouldn't have done that just to match the salary. So I feel like Kyle Lowry's gone out of Toronto after this offseason. But it sucks for Toronto because they're not going to get anything for him, most likely, unless they sign him to a cheap deal after this season and then they trade him. But that's huge just because it weakened all those teams fighting for the top. The Lakers, the Sixers, the Heat, all those that were in the spotlight for him. You also got John Collins, who was in the talks for a trade earlier in the season. That kind of died down. He stays in Atlanta. I don't know. I really don't know what I feel like about the John Collins Trae Young experiment. Because I don't feel like their games mesh too much as we thought they would. John Collins is a high-flying, leaping guy. Trae Young likes to pull it up from 30 feet. I don't know. I honestly don't think the Trae Young experience is working necessarily in Atlanta. I like Trae Young as a player. I think he's very talented. He could beat me one-on-one. I think single-handedly on one leg with his arm tied behind his back and blindfolded. But I don't know if he can lead a team necessarily. And I know that's kind of a bolder take. I just don't know. I kind of want to see how he does as the number 2 guy on a team. Just try it out. Who knows? What does Atlanta got to lose, right? Now moving on to the buyout guys, because I don't think there's anyone else that was supposed to be traded or rumored to be traded that didn't. Obviously the big 2, LaMarcus Aldridge and Andre Drummond. Blake Griffin, we're not talking about because he had already gotten done. Bada bing, bada boom. Brooklyn. We'll talk about LaMarcus Aldridge first. Brooklyn, they've gone full Thanos mode. KD, LaMarcus Aldridge, Kyrie, Blake Griffin, James Harden. Obviously, they're not all 5 going to play at the same time. I believe the starting lineup is most likely going to be KD, Harden, Kyrie, Joe Harris, DeAndre Jordan, and then you bring guys like Nick Claxton, Bruce Brown, Blake, LaMarcus Aldridge off the bench. But you have a lot of really talented veterans now on this team in Brooklyn. And they are the front runners, I feel like, for the championship. I don't know if anyone in the East can beat them, barring an injury. And I think the only team in the West that can beat them is the Lakers, and the Lakers are hurt. So it's going to be really exciting to see how Brooklyn does. And then you got the egos thing, too, though. That's the one concern. But I think LaMarcus Aldridge, it wasn't working out in San Antonio. He's in the latter stage of his career. He now wants a ring. Going to Brooklyn will give him that chance. And who knows, if he plays well, gets the opportunity, maybe he goes forward and gets a big deal or re-signs in Brooklyn. I don't see, though, Brooklyn re-signing both Blake and LaMarcus Aldridge. I think some team will pay one of those guys or both of those guys a lot of money to come in just for the star factor, and they'll probably take it. Let's be real. And then looking at Andre Drummond getting bought out from Cleveland, he's rumored and said will be going to LA with the Lakers. That's huge for the Lakers because part of what made them so good last season was their 3-headed monster at big man with Anthony Davis, Dwight Howard, and JaVale McGee. You could play Anthony Davis at the 4, and you have Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee at the 5. This season, when Anthony Davis has been healthy, it really hasn't been that. Montrezl Harrell has not worked out at all, I will say. As a Lakers fan, I loved the Montrezl Harrell move when it happened, and since I hate it fully. It just hasn't worked out. Doesn't provide much on the defensive end. He is a big liability. Offensively is where he shines, and even then it hasn't been superb. So now you have a starting lineup, most likely, of Dennis Schroeder, KCP, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Andre Drummond, which works out nicely because you play AD at the 4, LeBron is at the 3, he runs the offense, KCP is a good shooter, Dennis Schroeder can run the floor nicely when need be, and then you coming off the bench, you'll have your Montrezl Harrell, you'll have your Talen Horton-Tucker, Markieff Morris, Alex Caruso, etc., etc. The Lakers didn't lose really anything from their core. They just, that's the thing. If they were making a move for Kyle Lowry or whatever, Victor Oladipo, they would have had to have given up Taylor Horton-Tucker and Alex Caruso because they didn't have any first-round draft picks. So I think ultimately for the Lakers, it was a smart move just to be like, hey, we'll just sit back. We'll let Andre Drummond sign with us, and it will work out the buyout market and wait for LeBron and AD to return. That's the big thing for the Lakers. When will LeBron and AD come back? Will they be healthy and ready to go? If they're ready to go for the playoffs, the Lakers are the team to beat, without question. They got to be back and healthy, though. And I think I feel like they should come back 2 weeks to a week before the playoffs. Get a couple games in practice, get a good solid amount of practice and maybe 3 weeks worth of practices in, and maybe 2 or 3 games before the end of the regular season. Just with the core, everyone gets used to each other in a game. Get the game speed back. And then they go into the playoffs and they can do whatever they need to. But the Lakers could be a tough first-round matchup also, just from the standpoint of who knows where they might fall, how far they'll fall, because they're on a little bit of a skid right now without their big two. They get into the play-in tournament, and then LeBron and AD come back. That's going to be a tough first-round matchup for someone because you would assume the Lakers win. But that's all I got. There's no other big moves. If you have any other moves down below in the comment section, leave them, and I'll give my comments and leave my thoughts. But thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Until next time, have a great day. Next time, probably going to be talking about the Final Four. I'll be fully transparent, and I'm excited for that. But NBA trade deadline is great as well. Have a good day, everybody.